Okay, so I am posting a video response to basically a criticism of a blog post on the Mises.org website. Of course, the Mises.org website um, is probably the most comprehensive ideological internet space that exists. I don't think there's anything, really that compares in terms of, depth of material, literature, media, audio, video. Um, so I've never heard of this guy here, but I was watching his video, and he seems to be um, some sort of Marxist, possibly a Maoist. I've seen the graphic on the shirt before. It's got a bunch of. Anyway, so I think it's ironic that somebody who's a proponent of the slave state is taking us to task for alleged support of slavery and exploitation. I mean, here we have an ideology that's been responsible for literally tens of millions of people being in slavery in the gulags in Russia. Um, just literally slaves to the government, right? And of course, um, communists try to run away from communist states. These ideas were put into place, they were put into practice, and look at what happened. Mass graves, and it was just a very bad scene. So I guess I'd like to start out by pointing out there's nothing immoral about labor, and in fact, working is amazing. It gives you a sense of identity. It gives you money with which you can acquire property to better your life. It it also it makes you better at working. Just practice experience. You build up work skills that will raise your salary. So we begin with a straw man here, where it defines child labor as a child being chained to a desk in Indonesia or some country, and that would of course be slave labor, child slavery. Um, I think what I can't speak for anybody at the Mises website, not associated with them. But in terms of my view on the subject, of course, I do not support slavery of any sort or child slave labor. But I do support, somebody, an individual, um, regardless of their age, decides to get a job, and somebody wants to hire them. I don't see anything wrong about this. So I mean, you have to look at what motivates, say, a 15-year-old boy to work in a sweatshop. Why would somebody make that decision? Shouldn't they just play basketball with their friends and have mom cook them dinner? Well, maybe it's not quite that simple, right? Maybe they're living in conditions of abject poverty, and maybe the sweatshop's the only option they have, right? So what are you going to do? Are you going to take that option away from them, leave them nothing? So we don't libertarians, do not support slavery. We do support labor. Um, Communists, oppose labor. They consider it sort of immoral, yet at the same time they seem to support production. It's a very confusing ideology. But communists do support slavery. They want us all to be slaves of the government. They think everything should be owned by the state, and that includes ourselves. That our the decisions uh, in our lives in terms of what we produce. how we work, those should all be made by the government. And that's slavery. Without economic freedom, without the right to own property, you have absolutely nothing. Your life is the whim of some bureaucrat. And and of course, this guy whose video I'm responding to, he praises school. Probably because he's never had a job, right? School's pretty fun. Uh, you don't have to do anything. You think every so often. You're surrounded by all sorts of cute girls, and I mean, it's a good time. You know, especially when you don't have to worry about money. You know, but but in terms of building character, in terms of you know, even in terms of helping your mind develop, I don't think school is better than working. In terms of where you're at in life, you know, your own personal wealth and responsibility, growing as an individual. I don't think school is better than working. So I think this is sort of the typical leftist idiocy that comes from sort of a provincial grounding in Western society, and that has no real idea about conditions of poverty in the third world. They might whine about it, they might talk about it, but they don't even begin to understand it, right? So, I mean, people over there, they can't eat, so they work. They work crappy jobs for low pay, and I mean, you can't go to school if you have no money, no food, no shelter. Also, on a tangential argument here. I don't think that you need schools to alleviate literacy rates. I think if you look back in American history, before sorry, the Americans had compulsory schooling, uh, literacy rates, were climbing. Illiteracy rates were dropping, and I think that that's just it happens, right? Because of it happened because of prevalency of books, that printing press invention. So, and then we moved on to the topic of farm work, and I'd like to point out, farm work can be a lot harder and more brutal than factory work, especially sort of agrarian farming. That's why we had the Industrial Revolution, right? So then you moved on to the topic of teenage marriage. Wasn't really appropriate for the discussion, but whatever. So people have been getting married at an early age since as long as mankind's been around. I don't think it's really our place to judge the social customs of other cultures when people get married. Places where life expectancy is lower, they're probably going to get married sooner, and that was sort of the case in our society hundreds of years ago. And the question is, should somebody who is 16 years old or 14 years old in our society and in other societies work? My answer, a little nuance because it's a complicated question, is in yes, in my subjective opinion, but more importantly, it's up to the individual. Do they want to work? If they want to work, God bless them. They should. My personal perspective here is that going to school and university is really not as important as developing your mind on your own time. Um, it's important to get a job, make money, have a career. And I think that, in large part, schools are really government-run institutions that essentially brainwash people into believing what the government wants you to believe and in behaving in manners they want you to behave. I think it's social conditioning. So then we moved on to this myth about um, workers struggling politically is the subtext, to improve living conditions. And I think it's pretty clear that wage rates are determined entirely by productivity. You can't really, there's no wiggle room there. You can't say